Hello. This session is about technology. More precisely about technology and processes and the confusion thereof. Often, as I worked with organizations, I have found this confusion to be a real problem. As many people, when you discuss changing a process, designing a new process, really they were thinking implementing a new technology, buying something and going to an implementation method, rather than thinking through what is it that this process needs to do. What is a process? What is the best way to do it or to make it better? And then use technology to that effect. This is the purpose of this short lecture. I will not, of course, address all the issues related to technology, but there are some of the key concepts that I will address here. Technology, brainware, support network, culture. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. Technological change, process change, the confusion with technology implementation. First, what is technology? There's so much definition. Some of them are so broad, a way of doing things. How can you not confuse processes if you define technology that way? Over the years, here's the definition that I found to be the most workable, practical, and concrete. Technology is created capability. It is a capability. It can do something, and it is created, and it manifests itself in artifact. There is a thing. This screen here is a technology. The camera that's filming right now, the computer that is projecting this image right now, that is transmitting the digits for this image right now, are technologies. Created capability, the purpose of which is to augment human skills. And certainly in processes, that's what we want to do. Now, it can also replace some human skills and thus create a lot of resistance, as people do not like to see a skill that made their life worthwhile, that they've developed over years, decades, suddenly being replaced by a machine. Clumsily at first, then better, and then even better than it was before, faster, cheaper, and so on. Thus, resistance to change is a fundamental notion when we talk about technological change and process change as well, as you well know. What are the components of technology? Well, I didn't look for something too exotic. I went directly to Wikipedia. The core, as you know, a thing is a hardware. The what? The thing. The software, how do you use it? The brainware, how do you create value? Why? What for? In combination with other resources, how does it work? And how does it create superior value? And there, of course, you see the link with processes when we talk about brainware. And of course, the support network. A technology exists within a support networks, we could say, really. There's the need to repair the thing. The other technologies you need around it to make it work. The training of the people and the what to train them on. The people themselves. The value system. Values. Beliefs. The soft stuff. And I will get back to that in a minute. In order to discuss this topic, I've selected a number of topics, a number of examples. You will pardon me for using a war example. I'm referring to old wars, of course. The current ones are too depressing. But past historical wars have taken place. They are rich in lessons. They are periods of human challenge and human innovation and inventiveness, for obvious reasons. So let me start with the U.S. War of Independence and the introduction of the musket before that. Process of war, British line. Shooting, one line. Process is one line, the other line in front, and they shoot at each other. You look at this today, everybody who looks at an old movie say, this is crazy. Why do they do it that way? Well, you have to think that before the musket, there were old technologies that would not perform at the distance. So you'd had two-line charging at each other, which was the way to do it. When you introduce the new technology, typically, you don't change the process. You just replace the saber with the musket. And of course, hundreds of years later, it looks crazy. But originally, people know the process. They think or they perceive this new thing as replacing the old thing. Now, minimal adjustment, of course, is that you'd like someone in front here to kneel so that, they don't shoot at each other. And then you see the old technology as a backup. When technology is first introduced, it is typically clumsy, ineffective, not flexible, costly, subject to all sorts of problems, mistakes, faults, jams. So the old technology is kept as backup. How do you change the process? Well, it takes innovators now to say, what is the capability? What can this new technology do exactly? And what is the best way to use it in the process, considering the purpose that we're having? And very often it comes through accidental variation. In the War of Independence, for example, as the British were withdrawing from Concord, going back to Boston, the Minutemen, they were not, of course, they were hunters. They were pretty good with muskets, but forming a line was not part of their culture. So, of course, they would hide behind trees as the British were withdrawing and shoot from the tree and then withdraw before anyone could hurt them. Move to another tree, lay a couple of miles down the road, shoot again. That is certainly a different process. Not one that was designed or thought out. It was quite spontaneous. But afterwards, you sit back and say, hey, that's a different process. And it proved to be quite effective. It's a variation on a process that leads you to think about the best way to use the capability of the technology. Let's move to the Second World War, if you like. Introduction of the radar. New technology at first are clumsy, big, inflexible, as I already said, subject to all sorts of disruptions. So original radars, call it flexible if you will. All sorts of people, to see this today, looking at a screen and having information that they will walk around and transmit to someone that will try and use it. This, of course, is very clumsy, very visible, very vulnerable as well. So is this, and of course they were bombed out and rebuilt and bombed out and rebuilt and did not do much at first. And of course the culture was the senior people, those who were in power, were not used to that. Their skills, the skills that led them to the job that they have, that they hold, and the power and the position that they have, are very different. And they tend to hold on to these skills. And the one who are willing to adopt, of course, are the newcomers. They don't have this investment in the old skills. They're willing to try new things, but they don't have power just yet. Thus, resistance. Of course, it gets a little smaller, and then it can be incorporated in ships. In the War of the Pacific, the U.S. had the radar, coming essentially from Britain as an invention, but adapted and worked through the U.S. as well. And the Japanese did not. They were expert, though, at the old technology of firing at sea, aiming, firing, correcting the fire, and reaching their target fast. The admirals in the U.S. Navy, of course, were the old war, and the captains, essentially, they were old school. The value system was that they knew the old skill as well, and they didn't trust that thing where there were dots on a screen, sometimes stopping altogether for a while, sometimes coming back, sometimes false alarms. They didn't trust that. And yet, if they had originally, the advantage it gives you is just awesome. You can detect ships before they see you, fire before they see you, adjust the fire before they see you. You could, perform as they do today. So, of course, it took some innovators, some people who were willing to try new things, to change the process of naval fights. From these examples, let's move on to business processes and new technology adoption. Let me start with the example of the home designer, chapter 12. You have the case description and the business model and process mapping and stuff. Technology has been changing in that field as well. You would, of course, typically draw by hand, and having that skill of drawing by hand, making 3D representation on the spot, that would really impress the customer. And then coming with drawings, rechanging the drawing as design changes, as customers have new ideas typically, interactions, that takes time. Every interaction may take a week or more. Now technology, CAD/CAM technology, you can draw in 3D. Now that's been around for quite a while. Originally, it was quite clumsy. Originally, only the expert would be willing to spend the time to do it. Certainly was not really accessible to customers. So, of course, she had to change her processes to do that. And customer exposed to this would expect to have this as well. It is quite a different skill to be able to look at something and reproduce it by drawing to actually using a software to reproduce it. Typically, it would be the young people who just studied that would know it, and the older, senior, experienced, successful designer would find this quite a challenge and would resist at first, then hire someone younger to do it for her. But at some point, do you do it yourself? Being sitting on a computer and typing was not really why she got into that business, and found that it was, at the price they pay her, it was not worth her time. Just as in the initial introduction to the computer, I had the chance, if you like, to be part of that, to live through that. I was a consultant in a major firm at the time, and the reasoning was, if you have your hands on a keyboard and it's a junior position, we, the big consultants, would not do that. It's prestige, it's our value system. And with the reasoning would go that, at the price they pay me, I will not be typing. I didn't study all these years. At some point, and flash forward for 10, 15 years, now if someone is typing for you, you really look like old school. Same thing here. Technology gets smaller, faster, more effective, more impressive, cheaper, and some top-end customers, some more tech-friendly, younger customers, start using it themselves. So at that point, the designer has to change the way she does things. And first you could say, well, I've learned all this, now they do it themselves. Or you can move on and try it. What is the best way now, knowing that some of my market segments have this capability, to start working with them, transmitting the files between one another, maybe working jointly at a distance on the same design. And of course, technology moves on, gets better and better. You want, when you're designing a process, to know what are current technological capabilities. What is the potential, and what are your capabilities in your organization, and what are the cultural barriers that you'll be facing as you try to introduce them. Certainly, cost is a factor. Investing in new technology tends to be fixed cost, low variable cost, as opposed to doing it by hand, where it's very low fixed cost and very high variable cost. You pay someone for each unit that you produce, you're paying someone a lot of money. So there you have it. Let's get back to the model. I think the notion of a support network should become clearer. A car in the desert without roads, without the GPS system, without the police, checking, enforcing without the legal system that has regulations and penalties, without the justice system that applies these penalties, without the schools that give the permit. You know, the large infrastructure is extremely important. So you should know at the moment when you want to improve or design a process, what are our capabilities? What are new capabilities out there? And you certainly want someone in your team to bring this knowledge to the table. You don't want technology driving. You don't want to look the other way either. You want technological capabilities at the table, and at the moment when you're looking for ways to do things, to consider that. With the risks, including resistance to change, with the cost structure. If it's a new technology, there are more risk of failure. As I illustrated earlier, new technology fails more often. And then what do you do if you have to deliver it now it's not working? Use the old technology as backup? Maybe. That would be part of the process as well. So what we discuss in this book, process improvement, process design, must consider the potential of technology, not be driven by that. Certainly not take a technology on the shelf and implement it. Me too. Very often you'll be really automating a mess. If your process creates NVA, non-value added, then you'll be creating much faster and much more of it. So technologists have a very important role to play. And knowing your infrastructure, your technological hardware, information infrastructure is very important. As I've illustrated in a previous video, this is Delta Airline system, where you have the database, the information infrastructure, the operational pipeline, the customer experience, and the events that come in there and that impact these databases. This infrastructure, of course, is a huge investment. Maintaining it, developing it, upgrading it, and it does define the potential of various technologies, what you can and cannot do. Those limitations must be considered. If you don't, you may design a great process that you will not be able to make work. So as you look at the design methodology, you will see at some point you generate process concepts. At that moment, it's a green light. You generate all sorts of ideas about how you're going to do things. But when you get to the Pew matrix to select these concepts, now reality must come in at that point. Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the people? Should we expect cultural resistance to this? If so, can we manage it? To what extent can our organization roll with the punches and adapt? Any organization has a limited capability to adjust, and we should know that capability. So, and of course, our structure. The way we manage this organization is also a factor that can facilitate or limit our ability to use new technologies. In short, the takeaways, some takeaways, you should know and consider the potential and limitations of technologies anytime you consider improving or designing a new process. Know your culture. Don't always try and change culture. Work with the culture. Sometimes finding ways to swim with the current makes things a lot better. And there are ways if you're creative. Market segments. Your clients are using technology as well. There's no choice. So know what their capabilities are, what is the potential, and what's in the pipeline. And don't just come and implement new technology. At some point you have to implement new technology, but the process thinking, considering new technology, is fundamental. Thank you.